series are increasingly evolving into background noise. And it's not just because of corporate strategy. It's also due to a shift in audience behaviour, fragmented attention spans, and cultural habits shaped by our digital environments. We're consuming series a lot differently now because of all these factors. They're becoming background noise to our lives. We're surrounded by all these stories, but we don't particularly watch them all the time. Today, when you stream a series, you normally just throw it on in the background while you're cooking, scrolling on your phone, or when you're doing another task. They're not demanding our attention like they used to. But this isn't just a coincidence. A growing category of serialized content is being designed for ambient engagement. These are shows built to be easy to follow, easy to ignore, and easy to keep playing. They rely on predictable structures, emotionally low stakes, and scenarios. Surface level entertainment. So the question is, why they're being made this way? Is it corporate strategy, a result of audience fatigue, or simply the result of too much content chasing too little attention? This video essay explores how streaming platforms have reshaped our relationship with serialized media. It considers whether passive viewing is a symptom of declining quality, or a cultural adaptation of modern life. And it asks whether series have always functioned as background entertainment, with the difference now being that we finally recognise it. Because maybe it isn't a rupture, maybe it's a continuation. As television has long walked the line between narrative and distraction, shows were structured around simplicity and repetition. What's changed isn't just how we watch, it's how aware we are of the watching itself. Streaming platforms have amplified that awareness. Autoplay, binge drops, algorithmic curation, they've turned viewing into a kind of ambient rhythm. We're not just consuming differently, we're also noticing the difference more acutely. And hello, welcome to our channel if you are new here, but if you are a subscriber, then hello. Wow. Now let's take a look at streaming platforms and the era of binge culture. Streaming platforms haven't just changed the way we view our content, it's also shaped the way we watch. So what used to be a scheduled and episodic series has now turned into something a lot different. It's continuous and frictionless. We don't wait for the next episode anymore. It arrives automatically. And at times we don't choose what to watch next. The platform lines that up for us. And increasingly, we don't watch it with full attention. We just let it play in the background. Now this shift isn't accidental, it echoes what Raymond Williams described back in the 1970s, when he introduced the concept of flow. He argued that television wasn't experienced as an isolated program, but as a seamless stream. He quotes, "Not only the sum of all its parts, but also the sequence and flow of these parts." Viewers were guided by rhythm and momentum, not necessarily by narrative depth. However, streaming platforms have taken that logic and intensified it. Autoplay, full season drops, and algorithmic recommendations, they all work to keep us watching, but not necessarily engaged. But it's not just about replicating old habits in a new format. As Jenna points out in Netflix and the reinvention of television, platforms like Netflix don't just respond to audience behaviour, they actively shape it. Binge watching isn't a side effect, it's built into the infrastructure of the streaming platform itself. The interface, the release strategy, even the way episodes are structured, all of it encourages prolonged, low-friction engagement. And the kinds of shows that thrive in this system reflect that design. We could think of shows like Emily in Paris, The Witcher in the later seasons, and Sense8, visually polished, emotionally light at times, and structured for bingeability. And when we look at reality shows, Too Hot to Handle, Is It Cake, and The Floor is Lava, they push this narrative even further, offering content that's intentionally low effort and background ambient. These shows aren't designed to be watched closely, they're designed to be kept on. The technical infrastructure of streaming platforms reinforces this mode of consumption. Previously, we'd have to wait days or even weeks at a time for a new episode to drop. That would give us ample time to reflect on the episode itself. But now, full season drops encourage long viewing sessions that often blur into the background of daily life. And algorithmic recommendations close the loop, guiding viewers towards similar content that demands little emotional or cognitive investment. So together, these mechanics don't just support background viewing, they normalize it. they embed passivity into the structure of serialized media itself. What we're seeing isn't just a change in content, it's a change in how the content is being experienced. Another important thing to look at is oversaturation and choice overload. The modern media landscape is defined by excess. We have got a lot of shows to choose from. And with thousands of these titles spread across different streaming platforms, it's overwhelming at times. But this abundance of content we now have hasn't necessarily caused an increase in engagement. It's almost caused the opposite. For a long time, there's been a lot of psychological research on the consequences of too much choice. Psychological research has long warned about the consequences of too much choice. Mark Lepper's study found that when people are presented with an overwhelming number of options, they tend to disengage. Decision fatigue sets in, satisfaction drops, and the act of choosing becomes something too much. In the context of streaming, this means viewers are often settling for what's familiar or suggested, but not because it excites them, but because it's easier to process. This tendency towards low-effort selection helps explain the rise of series that are emotionally neutral and structurally predictable. These shows aren't necessarily chosen for their quality. They're chosen because they don't require deliberation. In a saturated environment, simplicity becomes kind of a refuge. It's not altogether a bad thing. The human brain is wired this way. It is created for efficiency, and it always looks for the least resistance. But the saturation isn't coming from studios. Audiences themselves contribute to the overflow. Henry Jenkins describes this shift as prosumer culture, where viewers actively participate in media creation. Take me, for example. I'm editing these videos and I'm creating them. Also, people through fan edits, commentaries, and artworks. Axel Bruns expands on this idea too, noting that the boundary between producer and consumer has become increasingly porous. While this democratization opens space for creativity, it also enhances content proliferation. The result is a media ecosystem that's a lot louder and harder to navigate. And faced with this, many viewers retreat from complexity. And in Cal Chaker's The Longing for Less, he offers a cultural explanation for this retreat, arguing that minimalism, whether in design, lifestyle, or media, is often a response to overstimulation. People aren't simplifying their homes or wardrobes, they're simplifying their attention. So, background noise series meets this need too. They offer continuity without intensity, presence without pressure. This preference for emotional and cognitive minimalism is reflected in the kind of shows that dominate. Disney Plus franchises lean heavily on brand familiarity, often recycling narrative structures to maintain viewer retention. And Netflix productions like Cowboy Bebop, The Grey Man, follow a similar pattern. Visually polished, heavily marketed, but ultimately, they blend into the background. These examples suggest that in a crowded field, what survives isn't necessarily what resonates. It's what doesn't overwhelm. And we can apply this logic and extend it well beyond traditional television. Platforms like TikTok, YouTube, and Twitch have normalized fragmentation and low investment formats. TikTok's endless scroll engages rapid passive viewing, and YouTube's autoplay and Twitch's ambient live streamers offer engagement that rarely demands full focus. These platforms don't just reflect changing habits, they reshape them. They reinforce a mode of consumption built around immediacy, repetition, and emotional neutrality. In this environment, serialized media isn't just one option among many. It's part of a broader system of distraction. And within that system, the most successful content is often the least demanding. But not because it's the most compelling, but because it's the easiest to absorb without thinking. The more saturated our media environment becomes, the harder it is to focus at times. And maybe it's not that we just have too much choice, but that we're being pulled in so many different directions. Many viewers might not be disengaging because they're uninterested, but because their attention is exhausted. Sherry Turkle's Alone Together explores how digital media have shaped our emotional habits. She notes that people often use the sound of television or streaming shows as a kind of buffer to keep the loneliness at bay. This isn't just background noise for convenience. It's a form of emotional regulation. In a world where leisure time is shrinking and connectivity is constant, audiences increasingly turn to media that soothes rather than stimulates. And this shift of engagement is also cognitive. Catherine Haley's, in her essay Hyper and Deep Attention, draws a distinction between two modes of focus. Deep attention is immersive and sustained, what we associate with reading, problem solving, and watching complex narratives. Hyperattention, by contrast, is fast, reactive, and fragmented. It thrives on multitasking and rapid shifts between stimuli. Streaming platforms and short-form media increasingly cater to the second mode. They're designed to accommodate distraction, not resist it. That's why so many series today flatten their emotional stakes and simplify their pacing. They're built for viewers who are only half watching. Research also shows that both children and adults often have media playing in the background with minimal engagement. Formats like ASMR videos or Study With Me live streams aren't designed to be watched closely. They're designed to accompany other tasks. They reflect a broader psychological reality. After long hours of work or social input, many people prefer media that doesn't demand full focus. And that's not inherently negative. Like mentioned prior, humans have always been able to multitask. Conserving cognitive energy is part of how we function. But it does raise questions about agency. When we stop actively choosing what we engage with, we become more vulnerable to algorithmic influence. And that's where concerns spread. Turkle and others warn that our appetite for ambient media gives tech platforms more room to automate culture. If we're satisfied with filler, content that's good enough to keep playing, then there's little resistance to replacing human-made art. In a landscape shaped by fragmented attention and emotional fatigue, the risk isn't just we lose quality, it's that we lose intention. Passive consumption may feel like relief, but it also makes us easier to manage. So the rise of passive media isn't something that's just accidental. Everything is made for a reason. The way serialized content is being produced and distributed is no mistake. And we have to remember that streaming platforms don't just deliver this media to us. They engineer these environments where retention is fostered. And at times, our engagement is measured in duration rather than depth. And this shift begins behind the industrialization of content creation. Serialized media today is often built around transmedia franchises, narratives that span platforms, formats, and markets. They aren't just storytelling choices, they're strategic frameworks designed to maximize audience reach while minimizing creative risk. Henry Jenkins in Convergence Culture, great book, describes how media companies increasingly rely on franchise logic to ensure continuity across different media channels. Now the goal isn't just to tell a singular story. It's to build a universe that can be endlessly extended, repackaged, and monetized. Amanda Lotz expands this critique in The Television Will Be Revolutionized, arguing that digital era television is shaped less by artistic ambition and more by platform economics. She shows how serialized content is now engineered for retention, structured to keep viewers inside the system. She also refers to autoplay, cliffhangers, and algorithmic recommendations as not being just features, but mechanisms of control. The series itself becomes secondary to the infrastructure that delivers it. This logic finds unsettling resonance in Adorno and Horkheimer's Dialect of Enlightenment. They warned that the culture industry was no longer interested in enlightenment, it was interested in pacification. Entertainment, they argued, was designed to demand no thought and discourage deviation from the norm. In Adorno's later essay, How to Look at Television, he deepens this critique, observing that viewers are not supposed to think, but to feel emotions which are pre-structured by the program. What he feared was the erosion of autonomy, the replacement of critical engagement with emotional compliance. That concern feels strikingly relevant today. Many streaming series abandon even the pretense or realism of narrative complexity. Instead, they rely on recycled tropes, predictable arcs, and algorithmically safe aesthetics. The shift from fake realism to openly commodified content reflects what Adorno saw as the rise of distraction as a form of social control. Serialized media, once a space for storytelling and reflection, now functions as ambient distraction. engineered to soothe, accumulate viewership, and discourage interruption. Zuboff's The Age of Surveillance Capitalism offers a contemporary extension of this critique. While her focus is on data extraction, she shows how platforms monetize attention by treating human experiences as raw material. Every interaction, every click, pause, or binge is tracked, analyzed, and fed back into behavioral prediction systems. Streaming services don't just deliver content, they harvest engagement. Serialized media becomes a part of a larger infrastructure of surveillance, where the goal is not just to entertain, but to shape behavior. In this context, the function of serialized media has shifted. It's no longer just about storytelling, it's about presence. Content has become a tool for retention, a mechanism for platform loyalty, a buffer against disengagement. The viewer isn't invited to reflect, but they're invited to stay. So at this point, it's pretty clear to see that streaming platforms aren't just designed to hold our full attention, they're actually there to coexist with it. But while this may look like new developments, it's actually been happening for quite some time. One way to understand this shift is to look at how media has long functioned as atmosphere. Television hasn't always been about narrative immersion, it's often just been about presence. Anna McCarthy's Ambient Television explores how screens in public spaces, like airports, waiting rooms, and hotel lobbies, serve more as an environmental texture rather than a storytelling device. The content isn't meant to be absorbed, it's meant just to be there. The same logic now applies to domestic streaming. Shows become part of the room, part of routine. They're less like events and more like furniture. But ambient viewing isn't just about location. It's about how media is designed to feel. Shaviro's post-cinematic effect argues that contemporary media often bypasses narrative complexity and goes straight for mood. It's not about following a plot. It's about being surrounded by rhythm, colour, and effect. Think of the way a Netflix series might lean on music cues, stylized visuals, and repetitive pacing to create a vibe, even when the story itself is pretty thin. Shaviro's point is that media today is built for immersion without focus. It's meant to be felt, not followed. Sound design plays a crucial role for this. Studies like Reconstructing Atmosphere and The Auditory Setting show how ambient sound encourages partial attention. Soft music, predictable sonic cues, and repetitive dialogue make it easier to tune in and out. Newell's Cinema and Sound and the Loudness issue adds a technical layer to this, showing how mixing practices have evolved to suit noisy environments and casual listening. In other words, shows are engineered to sound good even when you're not really listening. Psychological research supports this pattern. A study in 2009 found that background television can reduce attention spans in children. Other studies show that adults often use media as a kind of cognitive off switch, something to decompress with after work, not something to engage with deeply. This isn't just about distraction, it's about emotional regulation. The noise of sound media offers a compelling extension of this idea. It's argued that noise isn't just sonic, it's conceptual. In a saturated media environment, distraction becomes a kind of filter. Ambient content helps to manage overstimulation, not by demanding more attention, but by diffusing it. We don't just tolerate background noise, we actually seek it. It becomes a way to structure space and soften the edges of daily life. What emerges from this is a clearer picture of how serialized media has adapted, not just our habits, but also our limits. And at times, these shows aren't failures of storytelling. They're responses to a cultural condition where attention is fragmented, emotional bandwidth is low, and the presence matters more than the plot. It's easy to brand serialized media as something that's passive and manipulative, but that view completely misses how people use this content. And for many, the ambient series isn't just a distraction, it's actually a tool. After a long day, viewers often don't want to be challenged or immersed. They want something that holds the room together, something predictable, rhythmic, and emotionally steady. Michael Bull's work on personal soundscapes helps explain this. In Sound Moves, iPod Culture and Urban Experience, he shows how people use music not just for entertainment, but to manage mood, identity, and social boundaries. Streaming series function in much the same way. They're not just watched, they're used to soften the silence, to structure time, and to create a sense of presence. In this context, ambient media has become a form of emotional architecture. And while streaming platforms have made this more apparent, the desire for constant stimulation isn't new. Humans have long sought ways to avoid mental stillness, through radio, television, even idle conversation. What's changed is the delivery system. In a 2013 book by Jonathan Crary, he critiques how digital capitalism erodes downtime, pushing us towards perpetual engagement. But he also notes that this appetite for distraction predates platforms. Streaming didn't invent it, it refined it and monetized it. There's also historical continuity that's overlooked. Television has always been embedded in domestic rhythms. Raymond Williams, writing in Television, Technology and Cultural Form, argued that TV was never just a narrative medium. It was part of everyday atmosphere. His concept of flow described how programming was experienced as a continuous stream, shaping the texture of home life. What we see now with streaming isn't a rupture from that logic. Even when media is consumed passively, it can still have an active psychological effect. Viewers may not be fully focused, but that doesn't mean they're unaffected. Oliver Sacks explores how music, even when heard in passing, can shape memory, emotion, and identity. Serialized media can do the same. Background series often serve as emotional anchors. They provide continuity, companionship, and a sense of control in an overstimulating environment. Passive isn't always a negative thing. It can be deeply functional. And it's important to recognize that not all content fits the ambient mold. Some work still demands and rewards full attention. Series like Ratched, Arcane, The Queen's Gambit, and Mad Men resist background logic through visual complexity, thematic ambition, and narrative depth. These aren't just exceptions, they're reminders that engagement is still possible and still desired. The rise of ambient media signals a diversification of how we relate to content. Some stories are meant to be absorbed slowly, others to be lived with quietly. The challenge isn't choosing one over the other, but it's understanding what each mode offers us and what it reflects about the lives we're trying to manage. On one side, there's corporate strategy, shows that are low risk and guarantee easy viewership. And on the other side, there's the audience, who at times just want something that's easy to watch and soothing. It's easy to interpret this as a decline in artistic expression, but in a lot of ways, it's cultural adaptation. So the real question isn't about whether background series are a good or a bad thing. The question is, how do we engage with these series? Serialized content doesn't just reflect our culture, it actively shapes it. Thanks so much for watching today's video, guys. I hope you have enjoyed learning about this topic. Be sure to leave your comment in the comment section below so we can see your thoughts on it. And as always, I'll see you in the next one.